Welcome to Sci-Fi Alien. Imagine a galaxy where one sacred rule is followed by every civilization: don't wake the humans. But what happens when that rule is broken? What if humanity, once thought dormant, awakens with unimaginable power, ready to reshape the entire universe? Stay tuned, because the consequences are more mind-bending than you could ever imagine. In the farthest reaches of the universe, where galaxies spiral through time and stars are born and die in a never-ending dance, there existed a simple yet profound rule that no one dared to break: don't wake the humans. It was a law whispered through every spacefaring species, passed down by those who had survived long enough to understand its weight. The Zelians, with their bioluminescent bodies and unmatched technological prowess, had long adhered to this rule. To them, it was more than just a guideline, it was a fundamental truth of the cosmos. For centuries, they had watched the humans, a race that once teetered on the brink of destruction, slip into a deep slumber, drifting through the cosmos in vast, ancient ships. The humans, it seemed, had solved every problem, reached the peak of their potential, and, after exhausting their ability to innovate, had chosen to sleep. The story of humanity's hibernation had spread across the stars like a cautionary tale: a species too powerful, too dangerous, to awaken prematurely. To the Zelians, humans were an enigma. They had seen civilizations rise and fall, advanced species with technologies that defied imagination. Yet none of them, not even the Zelians themselves, could truly understand the depth of what humanity had done before entering their cryosleep. The humans, having nearly destroyed their planet through war and environmental decay, had decided to hibernate, not because they were defeated, but because they had transcended the need for conflict. They were too powerful for their own good, too curious for a world that no longer posed a challenge. Xenon, a voice echoed in the crystalline corridor of the research vessel, "Are you sure this is wise? The law, the one that has protected us for eons, it's not to be broken lightly." Xenon, the chief science officer of the Zelian fleet, turned toward his subordinate, his glowing crystal eyes reflecting a flicker of doubt. "The law is old, Ephraim. It's based on fear, not understanding. Our kind has been at the top for so long, we've forgotten what it feels like to be curious, to seek knowledge at any cost." Ephraim hesitated, but Xenon's voice had the finality of someone who had made up their mind. The Zelians were the most advanced civilization in the known universe. What did they have to fear from a race that had fallen asleep centuries ago? The humans, or at least the remnants of their civilization, were a curiosity. Their ships were relics, aging, weathered, drifting in deep space, where no one had dared to disturb them. The galactic archives spoke little of their history, merely a fleeting mention of a race that had gone to sleep to avoid extinction. The records were scattered, incomplete. But Xenon couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story, something deeper hidden beneath the surface. The humans, he believed, had unlocked secrets that no one else had dared to discover. One fateful day, as Xenon studied the ancient human vessel from the safety of his flagship, his fingers brushed against the control panel. His crew followed the usual protocol, observing from a respectful distance, as the law dictated. But Xenon's curiosity gnawed at him. He had to know. What if we could learn from them? Initiating scan, Xenon muttered to himself as he activated a quantum probe. The screen flickered, displaying a holographic map of the human ship. It was older than most civilizations, practically an antique, yet it hummed with an energy that made Xenon's crystalline form pulse with unease. The ship's cryogenic systems, once thought to be inert, began to flicker with life. Xenon. The signal, there's an anomaly, one of his crew members called out, his voice trembling with alarm. "Something's happening to the human ship." Xenon stood frozen. The probe's quantum resonance had done something unanticipated. It had woken them. His heart pounded as the dormant human pods, stored in cold slumber for centuries, flickered to life. One by one, they began to hum, as if acknowledging their own awakening. It was not a slow, mechanical process, but a flawless reactivation, almost as if the ship's systems had been waiting for this exact moment. The cryogenic sleep was supposed to last for 1,000 years more. The humans weren't supposed to wake up yet. "What did you do?" Ephraim's voice was laced with panic. "You've broken the law." "I didn't mean to," Xenon whispered, staring in disbelief at the screens. I thought they would be nothing more than a relic. But they're waking." "They're..." "Sir," another crew member interrupted, his voice quivering. "There are signs, signals coming from the human ship. They're alive." Xenon swallowed hard. He had not expected this. The humans, after all this time, were no longer just a curiosity. They were a force, a presence that could alter the course of the galaxy. The alarms on the ship began to blare. The once silent vessel now pulsed with life, and Xenon could hear his crew's growing unease. The ship, dormant for centuries, had awakened. The galaxy, it seemed, was about to change. As the Zelian fleet began to form a containment pattern around the human ship, Xenon couldn't shake the feeling that this was not a coincidence. They had done something that no one in the galaxy dared to: disturb the sleep of the most powerful race in existence. "The High Command will not be pleased," Ephraim muttered, her voice barely audible as she stared at the unfolding chaos. "We've disturbed them. We've broken the rule." Xenon's mind raced, but before he could respond, the communications panel lit up, and a voice from the human ship echoed through the channel. "Who dares disturb our slumber?" The voice was not angry, not yet. But there was an undercurrent of something much deeper, something powerful, something that had been dormant for too long. Xenon's eyes widened. "They're awake." The High Commander's face appeared on the screen, her crystalline form flickering with ancient rage. "You absolute fools," she bellowed. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The humans were supposed to remain in their sleep for at least another millennium. And you've woken them." Xenon stood frozen. The truth was undeniable. The rule had been there for a reason. The humans weren't just a race that had fallen asleep, they were an untapped power. A force far greater than the galaxy had ever comprehended. And now, the consequences of breaking the law were unfolding before him. The universe, it seemed, had underestimated the humans. "I didn't know," Xenon whispered, his voice barely audible. But as the warning signals blared louder, he realized it didn't matter. The humans were awake, and the universe would never be the same again. The warning was clear, a cautionary tale passed down through generations: do not wake the humans. The Zelian people, with their shimmering crystalline bodies and unparalleled knowledge of the universe, had long abided by this rule. For centuries, the most advanced species in the galaxy had respected the ancient slumber of humanity, believing it to be a necessary measure of survival. The humans had chosen to sleep away the worst of their history, their wars, and their ecological collapse, leaving behind a legacy of peace and a promise of rebirth. But no one really understood what lay dormant within their cryogenic pods, hidden away on ships that drifted aimlessly in the void. Xenon, chief science officer of the Zelian fleet, had always been a believer in knowledge above all else. While his people had achieved mastery over quantum mechanics, bioengineering, and even the manipulation of space-time itself, Xenon couldn't shake the one question that gnawed at him: what did the humans know? They had been the cause of one of the galaxy's greatest mysteries, and yet, their existence was largely ignored. They were nothing more than a footnote in galactic history, their advanced civilization lying dormant in space. But that was before the discovery. It was supposed to be a routine mission, an ancient ship, one of the many that had drifted through the galaxy since humanity's self-imposed hibernation. To Xenon, it was just another relic, another empty vessel. But his curiosity, ever his driving force, had other ideas. There was something about this particular ship. Its signature was different. Something in the patterns of its energy field felt alive. He knew that if he didn't investigate it, it would haunt him for the rest of his life. Xenon, are you sure we should be doing this? Ephraim, one of Xenon's closest colleagues, spoke hesitantly, her luminous form flickering with concern. The law, it's clear. We've all agreed, the humans must remain undisturbed. What you're proposing, it's risky. Xenon turned toward her, his crystalline eyes glowing brighter with the fire of resolve. The law was made out of fear, Ephraim, he replied quietly, his voice full of conviction. We've built a society based on knowledge, not superstition. Fear is a poor reason to hold back the pursuit of truth. Ephraim hesitated, a flicker of doubt clouding her thoughts. The Zelians had always been careful about interfering with other civilizations, especially humanity, whose potential had remained a mystery. She knew that breaking the rule was a dangerous gamble. But something in Xenon's tone convinced her that he was driven by more than just curiosity. He believed the humans had something valuable to offer, something their civilization could learn from. The hum of the ship's engines reverberated through the control room as Xenon made the call. Initiate the probe sequence. Let's see what they left behind. The probe, a sleek device designed to interface with the ancient ships, floated out from the Zelian vessel and approached the human ship. Xenon watched intently as the holographic display flickered to life, showing a 3D map of the human craft. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. The ship was ancient, worn by time and the cold expanse of space, but it pulsed with a strange energy, a low, almost imperceptible hum that resonated through the Zelian vessel like a heartbeat. It's alive, Xenon murmured, almost to himself. This ship should be inert, a husk. Why is it reacting like this? Ephraim stepped closer to the display, her face reflecting the same unease that had begun to grow in Xenon's chest. It's not just a ship, she said, her voice tinged with awe. It's as if the ship itself remembers something. As the probe signals reached the ship's cryogenic systems, a sudden surge of energy sent a ripple through the Zelian vessel. Alarms blared, and the room was filled with the low hum of warning. Xenon's hand shot out to steady the controls, his mind racing. This wasn't supposed to happen. What did you do, Xenon? Ephraim asked, her voice rising in panic. The humans. I don't know, Xenon answered, his voice tight with anxiety. He hadn't expected this sudden awakening, this stirring. The probe, it resonated with the cryogenic fields. I never anticipated that. The ship's once dormant systems flickered to life in ways that no one could have predicted. It was as if the ship had been waiting for something, some external trigger to reawaken it from its long, silent slumber. Xenon's mind raced as he realized what was happening. The human cryo-pods, each one containing a life that had been suspended in time for centuries, were beginning to activate, one by one. They're waking up, Xenon whispered, barely able to believe the words that left his mouth. The humans, those once thought to be a relic of history, were no longer dormant. They were alive. The air in the control room seemed to thicken, the weight of what they had just set in motion crashing down on Xenon. He had awakened the humans, not just from their physical slumber, but from a state of stasis that had been carefully maintained for so long. It was an irreversible act. He had broken the law, disregarded centuries of caution, and now, the consequences would be inevitable. What do we do now? Ephraim asked, her voice shaky with a mixture of fear and wonder. Xenon stared at the monitor, where the once still and quiet human ship now hummed with activity. We wait, he said softly. We observe. We have no choice now. The silence in the room was broken only by the soft hum of the ship's systems. Xenon knew that what they had unleashed was something far beyond his comprehension. The humans had not just been sleeping, they had been preparing. Preparing for what, though, Xenon could not yet fathom. As the minutes stretched on, and the human ship continued its eerie awakening, Xenon found himself caught between excitement and dread. He had uncovered a secret, one that could very well change the course of history. But as he watched the cryo-pods flicker to life, he realized that the humans were no longer a mystery to be solved. They were a force, and the galaxy had just been reminded of their power. We've done it now, Xenon muttered to himself, more to steady his nerves than anything else. The universe will never be the same. Ephraim looked at him, her face pale as the first human pod opened. Inside, a figure stirred. And for the first time, Xenon wondered if they were truly ready for what was about to come. The hum of the awakening human ship echoed in Xenon's ears as he watched the display on the control panel. The once dormant pods, scattered throughout the ship like forgotten relics, were now flickering to life. Each cryogenic chamber opened slowly, revealing human forms, their limbs stiff and unyielding from centuries of sleep. Xenon's crystalline body shivered with a mixture of awe and dread. He had done it. He had broken the universal law that no one dared to break, and now, the humans, those ancient, mysterious creatures, were waking. But what would they do? What reaction would they have after centuries of slumber? As the pods continued to open, Xenon found himself bracing for something monumental. Perhaps the humans would be angry. Perhaps they would be frightened, confused by the centuries of lost time. After all, they had been woken from a sleep that no one had dared to disturb. But as the first human stepped out of their pod, Xenon was caught off guard by what happened next. The humans stood there for a moment, disoriented, their eyes adjusting to the light. But as they took in their surroundings, there was no outburst of anger, no cries of confusion or rage. Instead, the human merely yawned, a loud, disinterested sound that echoed through the quiet room. Xenon blinked, unsure if what he was seeing was real. The human stretched lazily, as if they had merely awoken from an afternoon nap, and glanced around the room with an expression that could only be described as boredom. This is unexpected, Xenon muttered under his breath, his crystalline form flickering as his mind tried to process the scene. Another human emerged from their pod, stretching in much the same way as the first. Ugh, are we up already? The second human groaned, rubbing their eyes as they surveyed the room with a detached, almost indifferent gaze. It's still too early for this. Ephraim, standing beside Xenon, whispered in disbelief, they don't seem angry. Xenon shook his head, his crystalline appendages twitching with confusion. I don't understand. They've been asleep for centuries. You'd expect them to be furious, scared, even terrified. But instead, He paused, staring at the humans who seemed less concerned with their awakening and more focused on their discomfort. It's like they're bored. One of the humans, a female, glanced around the room, clearly unfazed. She raised an eyebrow, as if she had just woken up from an ordinary night's sleep. So, this is the new setup. Interesting, she said flatly. Could have used a better pillow though. And where's the coffee? Don't tell me you woke us up and there's no coffee. Xenon's crystalline body quivered, his mind racing to make sense of the situation. He had awoken a species that had been thought of as a fragile, almost mythological entity in the galactic records, a species who had solved all the universe's problems only to fall into a deep, endless slumber. And yet, here they were, stretching and yawning as if they'd simply been taking a nap after a long day. This was not the reaction he had expected. Ephraim took a cautious step forward, her glowing form reflecting a mixture of awe and disbelief. Are they joking? She asked quietly. Not a joke, Xenon replied, his voice tense. This is something else. Something we don't understand. They were supposed to be legends, sleeping giants that could bring about untold destruction. And now, this. The humans continued to wake up one by one, each displaying the same nonchalant demeanor. They didn't seem concerned with their surroundings, with the fact that they had been asleep for centuries, or with the fact that they were no longer alone in the galaxy. They were disinterested. A man in a blue jumpsuit stood up from his pod, blinking and looking around. His eyes met Xenon's, and he gave a half-hearted wave. Hey, sorry to interrupt, but anyone seen the bathroom? I'm kind of, well, you know. Xenon blinked, stunned by the casualness of it all. The bathroom, he echoed, struggling to comprehend the situation. Yeah, long sleep. Kinda need to, you know. Freshen up, the man replied, as if asking for a simple favor, completely unaware of the weight of the moment. Ephraim exchanged a look with Xenon, her expression filled with a mix of confusion and disbelief. They've been asleep for centuries, Xenon. And this is their reaction. They're not angry. They're not frightened. They're bored, Xenon replied, still trying to come to terms with what he was witnessing. The man who had asked about the bathroom yawned again, stretching his arms. Seriously, though? What time is it? I thought we had another few centuries to sleep. He rubbed his eyes and shook his head. This is ridiculous. You wake us up, and now you expect us to, what? Fix your problems. Xenon's mind raced. What had they done? He had awakened a species that was far beyond anything the galaxy had ever encountered, and yet, they weren't acting like he expected. These weren't the frightened, desperate beings that legends had warned about. No, the humans weren't the helpless creatures that others had painted them to be. They were disinterested. They're not concerned with anything, Ephraim said softly. It's like they've seen it all before, and nothing matters anymore. Xenon's voice trembled as he tried to grasp the implications of what was happening. Maybe that's exactly it. They've seen everything. They've solved the universe's greatest challenges. They've conquered the very problems that have plagued other civilizations for eons. What's left for them? What is there to fear, to be excited about, if you've already achieved it all? The first human, still yawning, glanced at the others, then back at Xenon. All right. Let's cut to the chase. You woke us up, now what? Are we supposed to fix your broken galaxy? Because, honestly, I'm just not feeling it right now. Xenon's crystalline form shimmered with uncertainty. What had he awakened? This was not the species that had been written about in galactic archives. These humans, these seemingly disinterested beings, were a far cry from the fearful, desperate creatures that others had anticipated. One of the humans turned to another and muttered, "Honestly, I thought we'd at least be able to watch something before we had to deal with whatever mess they're throwing at us. I mean, really. No respect for a good nap." Xenon was left in stunned silence, his mind reeling. He had thought the humans were the sleeping giants of the universe, waiting to either save or destroy everything in their path. But now, he wasn't so sure. They were more than just powerful, they were beyond everything else. They had transcended the need to be angry or scared. All that remained was a quiet, unshakable boredom. And in that boredom, there lay something far more dangerous than any amount of rage. The humans, it seemed, were no longer a force to be feared. They were something far greater, an enigma, and one that Xenon could not fully comprehend. After the humans had shaken off their slumber, their disinterest had been palpable. At first, Xenon had been puzzled, expecting some form of emotional outburst, perhaps fear, or fury, but instead, they had awoken with a mere sigh and complaints about their nap. It had been a surreal, almost mundane awakening. But now, as the days passed and the humans grew more aware of their surroundings, something changed. What started as an indifferent stirring soon turned into something far more significant. Xenon stood at the command center of his research vessel, staring at the screens as the human ships began to power up. At first, the humans had simply stretched, grumbled about their lost time, and laughed at their disorientation. But now, the ships, once dormant for centuries, were coming alive with purpose. Xenon watched as the screens displayed a series of complex calculations, mathematical equations, and star maps that began to form in rapid succession, as if the humans were reprogramming the entire fabric of space itself. "Xenon, look at this," Ephraim said, pointing to the data streaming in from the human vessels. "They're not just waking up, they're reorganizing the galaxy." Xenon narrowed his eyes. He had never anticipated this. The humans had been asleep for so long, and now they were acting. They were acting like they were not just participants in the universe but its creators. The ship's systems were processing vast amounts of information, mapping new star systems, altering the trajectories of entire planets. They were moving things, restructuring the galaxy in ways that were almost incomprehensible. "They're not just adjusting," Xenon murmured. "They're redesigning. They're not just here to exist, they're here to change things." Ephraim looked at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "But how? They've been asleep for centuries. How do they have the ability to do this?" "It's not just the technology they have," Xenon said, his voice thick with awe. "It's the knowledge. They've seen every possible scenario, calculated every possible outcome, and now they're creating." The first shift was subtle at first. Xenon's ship picked up on a ripple in the fabric of space, a slight bend in the gravitational pull of a nearby system. It was a planet, a system that was once considered perfectly stable, but now, the humans were moving it, gently, carefully, but with undeniable authority. As Xenon's team watched in stunned silence, the humans shifted the planet's orbit, bringing it closer to its star, changing the climate, altering the very course of its future. "What are they doing?" Ephraim asked, her voice a whisper of disbelief. "They're remaking the universe," Xenon replied, his mind racing. "They're not just solving problems, they're rewriting the rules of existence itself. The next day, Xenon's crew watched in awe as the humans began recalibrating entire star systems. They weren't merely adjusting the orbits of planets, they were shifting the very foundations of galactic geography. One by one, human ships docked with distant planets, altering their rotations, adjusting the atmospheric conditions. It was as if they were treating the universe like a model, something to be sculpted and perfected. Why would they do this? Ephraim asked, shaking her head in confusion. This isn't just fixing things, it's creating new worlds. Xenon's voice was tinged with reverence. Because they can. Because they've already seen every possible outcome, and they know how to make it work. For them, the universe isn't something to conquer. It's something to design. The humans had no time for the politics or the struggles that had defined the galaxy for centuries. As the humans reorganized systems, they turned their attention to the deeper problems, those that no one else had thought to address. They began crafting new solutions to age-old dilemmas. With swift precision, they altered the gravitational fields of dead stars, transforming them into bright, new suns. They engineered artificial wormholes to create new pathways for travel, paths that bypassed the limitations of existing space travel. In a matter of days, the human ships had mapped out an entirely new network of intergalactic routes. We've reconnected the universe, one of the humans said, their voice deep with satisfaction. All these lonely star systems, they don't have to be isolated anymore. We've bridged the gaps. We've made the universe smaller. More manageable. Xenon stood motionless, a deep sense of awe washing over him. They're not just fixing things. They're improving everything. But it wasn't just their technical abilities that astounded Xenon. It was the way they approached the work. The humans moved through the galaxy with ease, as if everything they did was just an extension of themselves. There was no rush, no desperation to prove themselves. They simply knew. They knew how the universe worked, and they knew how to make it better. They acted with the calm assurance of beings who had seen the beginning and end of all things, and had found a way to make it work. In one particularly stunning display of power, the humans rewired an entire black hole. With a subtle manipulation of quantum fields, they extracted the immense gravitational energy and used it to power entire star systems. It was an unprecedented feat, something the most advanced minds in the galaxy could scarcely comprehend. We've made the impossible possible, one human said, watching the black hole shift its position, now harnessed for energy. This is the future. Not just for us, but for everyone. Xenon's mind reeled. The humans, once seen as a fragile species that had fallen into hibernation, had risen with a quiet, unshakable confidence. They were not here to conquer. They were here to build. To create. To reshape the very structure of existence. They're not just changing the galaxy, Xenon said, more to himself than to anyone else. They're changing reality. As the days passed, the humans continued their work. Their ships moved like tendrils of light through the galaxy, altering, enhancing, and remaking everything in their path. The systems they touched flourished, and the galaxies they influenced became brighter, more connected, more efficient. The humans had not only awoken from their slumber, they had awoken to a new purpose. And with every shift of a planet, every recalibration of a star's core, they began to realize that the universe wasn't something they had to fix. It was something they could mold, something they could improve upon, something they could make better. Xenon stood at the edge of the observation deck, watching the humans continue their work. His crystalline body trembled slightly, and for the first time in his life, he felt the weight of his own insignificance. The humans were no longer the fragile species he had once believed them to be. They were something far greater. They were the architects of the universe, the silent creators, and the galaxy would never be the same again. Xenon, Ephraim said, her voice quiet but full of awe. We thought we were the masters of the galaxy. But we've just seen the true future. The humans are, beyond us. Xenon didn't respond. He didn't need to. He knew the truth. The universe was changing, and the humans were leading the way. As the humans continued to reorganize the galaxy with a cool, almost effortless confidence, a new realization began to settle into the minds of the once dominant species of the universe. The Zelians, proud of their technological superiority, had always held that efficiency, seriousness, and bureaucratic precision were the cornerstones of any advanced society. They had constructed their entire way of life on these principles, believing that progress and stability came from strict governance and a meticulous approach to every decision. But with each new day, as the humans moved through the galaxy like a tidal wave of creativity and unbridled energy, it became clear that the old ways of governing, of adhering to rigid systems and rules, were now obsolete. The humans, instead of imposing new systems or hierarchies, had created something revolutionary, something that defied logic yet seemed to work effortlessly. No longer bound by centuries of tradition or formal protocols, they had reinvented governance entirely. Their solution was simple: relaxation, community, and most importantly, fun. It was the complete antithesis of the tightly controlled, impersonal bureaucracies the Zelians and other civilizations had relied on for millennia. One day, as Xenon stood watching a group of humans move about the galaxy's new intergalactic meeting place, a space station they called the Universal Chill Zone, he found himself bewildered. The station, suspended in the void between galaxies, had been constructed with no clear purpose other than to serve as a neutral ground for all species to come together. But unlike the cold, sterile council chambers of the past, this place was alive with laughter, music, and the kind of spontaneous interactions that defied the formality of interspecies politics. Ephraim, who had joined Xenon at the observation window, seemed just as perplexed. Is this how they intend to govern?" she asked, watching as humans and other species mingled freely, playing games, discussing politics over meals, and even holding impromptu dance-offs. Xenon shook his head slowly. "I thought they would come up with some grand, strategic vision for the future. But this is something else entirely." A Zelian diplomat, who had been present for the first few sessions in the Universal Chill Zone, approached them, his body flickering with anxiety. "Chief Science Officer Xenon, I don't understand," he said, his voice quivering. "We've seen what the humans can do. They've rearranged entire star systems, created new ways of traveling across galaxies, but now they insist on this. There's no protocol, no schedule, no hierarchy. They want to govern over karaoke nights and potluck dinners." Xenon sighed, rubbing his crystalline appendages together, his mind swirling with confusion. What they're creating here, it's not a government, not in the traditional sense. It's something new. Something that transcends the very idea of governance we know. As they watched, a human stood in the middle of the space station, microphone in hand, surrounded by beings of every shape and size. The human grinned and spoke to the crowd. "All right, folks, time for the next game. Let's settle this intergalactic dispute with a dance battle." Xenon's jaw nearly dropped. The fate of entire star systems, discussions about resource management, and the preservation of peaceful intergalactic relations were all being decided through games, through the very essence of fun. He couldn't comprehend it. What was happening here? How had it come to this? "We've had enough of fighting and arguing," a human standing near the center of the crowd said with a laugh. "The universe is full of problems, sure. But we don't solve them by yelling at each other or drawing lines on maps. We solve them by connecting, through joy, through shared experiences. The universe doesn't need another bureaucratic system. It needs understanding. It needs empathy." Ephraim shook her head in disbelief. "This can't be real. This is how they plan to settle galactic matters." Xenon was silent for a moment, absorbing the scene. As strange and disorienting as it was, a part of him couldn't help but recognize the brilliance in their approach. They were turning everything upside down. The humans didn't see the universe as a puzzle to be solved with rigid rules and endless paperwork, they saw it as something to be lived, something to be enjoyed. There was a radical simplicity to their methods, a depth to their understanding of how life worked that went beyond anything he had ever considered. "Look," Xenon said, his voice filled with a new realization, "the Zelians, hell, even we, have always focused on precision and structure. We've governed through rules, laws, and strict systems. But they," he gestured to the crowd of beings around him, who were now engaged in a playful game of virtual reality tag, "they govern through experience. Through connection. They're showing us that maybe, just maybe, the universe can be led not by rigid control, but by shared joy." Ephraim was still skeptical. "But how can this work? What happens when the big issues arise? When we face intergalactic crises, natural disasters, wars, how can they resolve them with fun?" Xenon paused, looking over at the gathering once more. He had been taught to believe that only through structure could peace and order be maintained. But now, as he watched the humans and other species coming together, laughing and bonding over what seemed like trivial matters, a quiet understanding began to settle within him. The solutions to the galaxy's problems weren't always found in hard, cold logic. Sometimes, they were found in the connections people made when they let go of their fears and embraced something simpler. "The universe is complex," Xenon said slowly. "It's filled with contradictions. But perhaps the answers to our problems aren't as complicated as we think. Perhaps we've been looking at governance the wrong way. The humans, they've found a way to work together that doesn't rely on power or control. It relies on something far stronger, community." As the humans began organizing a galactic trivia game, one that would involve multiple species, Xenon couldn't help but marvel at the sight. Here they were, with no formal regulations, no paperwork, and no grand speeches, just beings of different origins, from different walks of life, coming together to enjoy one another's company, to share stories, to learn from each other. The humans had invented something that had never existed before, a universal system of governance based on connection. "Maybe the future of the galaxy isn't about winning," Xenon whispered, his voice filled with awe. "Maybe it's about learning how to live with each other." Ephraim, standing beside him, watched as the humans led the game with a contagious energy that seemed to draw everyone in. "Maybe," she replied quietly, "the real power of governance lies in making people feel like they belong." Xenon nodded, watching the game unfold. It was still hard to believe, but for the first time, he understood. The galaxy had been governed by control and structure for eons, and yet it had never felt truly connected. The humans, in their simplicity and playfulness, had shown a new path forward, one that didn't just involve leaders and followers, but one that encouraged everyone to join together and make the universe a better place, one shared moment at a time. As the humans continued to settle into their new roles in the galaxy, something truly extraordinary began to emerge. They were no longer just the quiet, mysterious species that had fallen into a long hibernation. No longer were they just a species that had been preserved by their own lack of challenges. The humans, with their seemingly careless approach to governance and interspecies relations, began to unveil their true power, not through bureaucratic systems or military might, but through innovation. The galaxy watched in astonishment as they started offering solutions to problems that had plagued the universe for millennia. These solutions were radical, seemingly impossible, yet undeniably effective. The humans, it seemed, had the ability to create the unimaginable. Xenon stood in the observation deck of his ship, his crystalline body still vibrating with a mix of awe and disbelief. Just days ago, he had watched as humans laughed off the chaos they had caused by awakening from their slumber, as if the entire galaxy had no weight in their eyes. But now, the solutions they were coming up with, solutions to energy crises, intergalactic travel, and even existential problems, began to resonate with a quiet brilliance that Xenon couldn't ignore. They weren't simply fixing problems, they were redefining what was possible. One such breakthrough had come when a group of humans, led by a brilliant scientist named Lena, introduced a radical new concept that stunned even the Zelians, the recycling of dying stars. For millennia, advanced civilizations had looked at dying stars as sources of cosmic waste. The energy emitted by a collapsing star was immense, and there was no way to harness it effectively. But humans, in their relentless pursuit of practical innovation, had found a way to tap into this immense energy and repurpose it. Lena had stood before the Galactic Council, her eyes filled with the same quiet confidence that had become synonymous with human ingenuity. For too long, we've seen dying stars as something to be feared, she said, her voice calm but carrying the weight of a revolution. We've seen them as threats, as forces of destruction. But they aren't. They're resources. We just need to think differently. Ephraim, who had been present during the presentation, turned to Xenon with a look of disbelief. They want to use a dying star? How is that even possible? Xenon, still stunned, could only nod. They've seen a way to harvest the energy of the star's collapse. They plan to contain the matter, the particles, everything that would normally be wasted, and transform it into usable energy. The room fell silent as Lena continued. We call it a star forge. The energy released during a star's death is powerful enough to power entire galaxies. But instead of allowing it to dissipate, we've designed a system that can harness it. Not only can we create power for countless civilizations, but we can also direct the flow to repair intergalactic infrastructure, clean up environmental damage, and even restore dying ecosystems. The possibilities are endless. Xenon stood motionless, absorbing her words. The idea was so simple, so radically different, that he could barely wrap his mind around it. What Lena proposed wasn't just about creating energy, it was about reshaping the entire approach to resources. Instead of exploiting and consuming, the humans were creating sustainable systems from the very forces of nature that others feared. As the Starforge project moved forward, it wasn't the energy or the technology that fascinated Xenon, it was the human way of thinking. They didn't look at the universe and see problems. They saw possibilities. They didn't try to force solutions upon a system that didn't want to bend. They rethought the problem entirely, finding a way to create something new from the very forces that had once been seen as destructive. It's like they're not just solving problems, they're reinventing the entire universe, Ephraim said, her voice tinged with both admiration and frustration. How do they do it? Xenon's voice was quiet, almost reverential. Because they're not bound by the rules we follow. They don't see the universe as a collection of immutable laws. They see it as a canvas, something to mold, something to improve. The humans didn't stop with the Star Forge. As they grew more confident, their innovations became even more audacious. One human named Carter, an engineer who had spent years studying the very fabric of space, time, introduced a concept that the Zelians had dismissed as impossible, a self-sustaining wormhole network. For centuries, wormholes had been seen as unstable, unpredictable anomalies. To create a permanent network of wormholes that could safely carry ships across the vast distances of the galaxy seemed beyond even the most advanced civilizations. But not to Carter. "We've always seen wormholes as something we travel through," Carter said during his presentation, "but why not something we control? If we can stabilize them and create pathways that aren't just one-way trips, we can revolutionize travel, trade, and even communication. Distance will no longer be an obstacle. We'll be able to send goods, information, and people across galaxies in a matter of seconds." Xenon watched in amazement as Carter demonstrated the first successful test of the wormhole network. A small ship, with Zelians on board to ensure safety, passed through the newly stabilized wormhole, disappearing in one location and reappearing in another. The Zelians, who had spent eons trying to understand the behavior of wormholes, had long accepted their volatility as a permanent limitation. But the humans, they had done the impossible. They had tamed the chaos and turned it into an asset. The ripple effect was immediate. The once insurmountable barriers of space were no longer a limitation. What was once a month-long journey across star systems now became a few seconds passage through a controlled wormhole. The implications were staggering, not just for trade and communication, but for the very idea of how civilizations would interact with each other. And still, the humans pushed forward. As Carter's wormhole network expanded, Lena's Starforge powered entire galaxies, and humans began experimenting with yet another impossible feat, the creation of artificial moons capable of terraforming planets. They weren't just creating energy, they were creating entire ecosystems. They weren't just fixing the universe, they were building it from the ground up. "Everywhere we go, we change things," one of the human leaders said as they looked over a new project, a massive artificial moon designed to regenerate a dying planet. "We don't wait for the universe to fix itself. We fix it. That's our gift." Xenon was left speechless as he realized the magnitude of their innovation. The humans were not just pioneers, they were cosmic architects, reshaping the very laws of existence. What had started as a quiet awakening had become a cosmic revolution. Every new idea, every new project, had one thing in common: it defied the expected. It shattered the boundaries of what was possible. The humans were no longer a species on the periphery of galactic history. They had stepped forward, not with weapons or armies, but with ideas, radical, daring, and brilliant ideas that made the old ways seem inadequate. The galaxy had underestimated them. And now, the humans were proving that their greatest gift was not their strength or their numbers, it was their ability to think differently, to create, and to turn the impossible into the inevitable. The humans had not only disrupted the galaxy's existing order, but in doing so, they had redefined what progress truly meant. With their radical innovations, they had already shown the universe that progress wasn't simply about solving problems, it was about creating entirely new possibilities, things no one else had even imagined. As the weeks passed and their ideas continued to ripple across the galaxy, a powerful realization settled in: the humans weren't just changing the game, they were rewriting the very rules of what it meant to advance. Xenon stood in the observation room, his glowing crystalline body pulsing softly as he watched the vast canvas of the galaxy unfold. What had once been a sterile, calculated expanse was now alive with possibility, and all of it was tied back to the humans. Their innovations weren't simply revolutionary, they were fundamentally different from anything Xenon's civilization had ever conceived. They didn't just view progress as the accumulation of knowledge or the perfection of a system, they saw it as the continual transformation of everything that existed, including the very concept of what was possible. "Look at them," Ephraim said, her voice filled with a quiet awe as she pointed at the human ships, now busily working on a project of planetary rebirth. "Every time they create something new, it's like they open a door to a universe of possibilities. It's as if they're constantly shifting the boundaries of what progress even means." Xenon's gaze followed her finger, watching a team of human scientists and engineers working on a new type of terraforming project. Their project wasn't just about restoring life to a barren planet, it was about turning it into something entirely new. The humans were not satisfied with just fixing what was broken. No, they wanted to create an entirely new kind of world, one that didn't merely exist but thrived in ways no one had ever thought possible. "Their progress is a force," Xenon said quietly, his voice filled with a mix of awe and uncertainty. "They don't just adapt to the world around them, they shape it. They bend the very laws of nature to their will, and in doing so, they create a new paradigm. It's no longer about managing resources or systems. It's about designing a future that doesn't exist yet." Ephraim nodded slowly, her mind clearly racing. "But how do they do it? How do they keep coming up with these ideas? They don't follow the same rules, the same constraints that we do. It's as if they don't see the limits of what's possible." Xenon stood still for a moment, the full scope of humanity's potential dawning on him. They don't see limits, because they don't believe in them. Where others see the edge of possibility, humans see the beginning of something new. They've made it clear, for them, progress isn't linear, it's cyclical. It's about constant reinvention, constant creation. One human leader, named Elijah, stood before a newly terraformed planet, looking at the results of a monumental effort that had taken mere weeks. The planet, once desolate, now pulsed with life. Trees towered where barren rock had once stood, and rivers flowed through landscapes that had been devoid of water for millennia. The transformation was breathtaking, not just in its scope, but in its execution. "We've done it," Elijah said, his voice calm yet filled with pride. "We didn't just fix this planet. We gave it a new identity, a new future. And that's what progress is about. Not just restoring what was, but envisioning what could be." Xenon, who had been observing from afar, couldn't help but marvel at the sheer audacity of the human approach. They didn't just focus on fixing problems, they redefined the very concept of what it meant to advance, to improve, to evolve. Their advancements weren't about climbing a ladder rung by rung. They weren't about taking small, measured steps toward an uncertain future. No, the humans leaped forward, creating entire new realities as if they were born from their imagination, as if the boundaries of the possible were merely suggestions, not rules. "We could never have done this," Ephraim said, her voice filled with reverence. "The idea of completely remaking a planet, not just restoring it, it's beyond what we've ever considered. And yet, for them, it's just another day at the office." Xenon turned his gaze back to the planet they had just altered, the green fields stretching out like a vibrant tapestry. He understood now. It wasn't just the scope of their achievements that was so staggering. It was the way they viewed the world, and the universe, as a malleable, ever, evolving entity that could always be improved, always be reshaped. Progress, for humanity, wasn't just about moving forward with a plan. It was about creating possibilities that no one else could see. It was about constantly reinventing the future and never settling for what existed, no matter how grand. As he watched Elijah and his team step away from the planet they had remade, Xenon realized that the true power of humanity lay not in their technology or their sheer willpower. It lay in their mindset. Their ability to envision a world, a universe, that didn't exist yet, and then make it real. Where the Zelians saw the galaxy as something to understand, to categorize, and master, the humans saw it as something to shape, something to continuously improve and mold into something better. Xenon felt a sense of awe stir deep within him. For so long, his people had believed that knowledge and technology were the keys to progress. They had prided themselves on their efficiency, their control over the forces of nature. But the humans had shown him something else, that true power didn't lie in command or in mastery. It lay in the ability to create. To imagine new worlds, new possibilities, and new ways of existing, even when those possibilities had never been seen before. They don't just adapt to the universe, Xenon whispered, watching as another human team began preparing for their next project, a vast, planetary, scale network to stabilize the intergalactic climate. They redefine it. They turn limitations into opportunities. Ephraim, who had been quiet for a long while, finally spoke. But where does it end? If they can reshape entire planets, entire star systems, where does it stop? Xenon's eyes gleamed with understanding. It doesn't stop. For them, progress is a never-ending cycle. The universe is a canvas, and they paint on it without fear. They've already shown us that there are no limits. That's their ultimate power. The humans had redefined progress. They had shifted the conversation from fixing the old to creating the new. Their innovations, once dismissed as fantastical, were now shaping the future of the galaxy itself. Xenon couldn't help but marvel at the simplicity of their vision. They didn't merely fix problems, they created new ways of being, new forms of existence. And in that act of creation, they had changed the very fabric of reality itself. The humans were not just rewriting the rules of the universe, they were writing an entirely new story. And the galaxy had no choice but to follow their lead. As the days passed, it became increasingly clear that humanity was not just altering the fabric of the galaxy, they were reshaping the very concept of creation itself. With every new project, every new invention, and every new leap they took, the humans were no longer simply participants in the galaxy's unfolding history. They were the architects of that history. They were no longer seen as a species that had fallen into hibernation, waiting for a world to fix itself. They were now the cosmic creators, beings who didn't just adapt to their surroundings, but designed them. What had once been thought of as an accident, a fluke of fate, was now a force so profound that it could not be ignored. Xenon stood at the helm of his research vessel, staring out at the cosmos with a deep sense of reverence. He had watched as the humans, with a casual ease, had remade entire star systems, revived dying worlds, and constructed new realms that were once only the domain of dreams. He had watched as they didn't just move through space, they bent it, reshaped it, and in doing so, created an entirely new order. I never thought I would see the day, Xenon said softly, his voice reverberating through the quiet command room. Ephraim stood next to him, equally captivated by the sight before them. A civilization so young, so full of contradictions, suddenly taking control of the entire galaxy, transforming everything they touch. They're not just building things, Ephraim. They're creating a new universe. Ephraim nodded, her eyes never leaving the holographic display in front of them, which showed a newly terraformed planet, lush with forests and oceans, all restored by the hands of humans. I always thought progress was a linear path. One step after another, in a straight line. But the humans, they don't walk that path. They jump forward, and the rest of us are left following in their wake. Xenon thought back to the first time he had seen a human step foot on a newly rebuilt planet, their eyes not filled with awe or wonder, but with purpose. There was something almost detached in their gaze, as if they expected the impossible to happen. But that expectation was what made them so powerful. They did not just hope for a better future, they created it. And now, the universe itself was beginning to feel the weight of that creation. As Xenon and Ephraim watched from their vessel, the humans were busy in the heart of a massive new project, a galactic communication network that would connect star systems in ways that had never been imagined before. A network so advanced that it would allow instantaneous travel of information, bypassing the limitations of light, speed. It was the culmination of years of research and trial, and now it was becoming a reality. They're calling it the ethereal web, Ephraim said, her voice tinged with awe. A network that will bridge galaxies, allowing species to communicate in real time. To break down barriers between planets, to end isolation. Xenon nodded, his mind racing with the implications. And that's just one of their projects. They've created energy from dying stars, transformed barren worlds into fertile ones, and now they're connecting the galaxy in ways we never thought possible. They're not just changing the rules, they're creating new ones entirely. Ones that serve everyone. In a meeting that followed, Xenon sat with the leaders of the galaxy's remaining civilizations, Zelians, Zayans, and others, all watching the humans, now the undisputed leaders of progress. As the humans continued their work, Xenon felt an overwhelming sense of humility. These beings, who had once been considered nothing more than survivors, were now shaping the very fabric of existence. I don't think we'll ever be able to go back to the old ways, Xenon said, looking across the room. The old systems, the rigid structures of bureaucracy we used to rely on, they're gone. The humans have given us a glimpse of something far more profound, a future that isn't controlled by systems, but by creation. One of the human leaders, Elijah, stood up, his hands clasped in front of him. His demeanor was calm but filled with an unshakable resolve. It's not about control, he said, his voice cutting through the room. It's about possibility. We didn't come here to dominate or to impose our will. We came here to build. To create a galaxy where anything is possible, where every species can thrive, and where we can all contribute to a shared future. Xenon's eyes lingered on Elijah for a moment. The simplicity in his words carried a weight that seemed to echo in the very fabric of space itself. The humans had shown that the true power of creation wasn't in ruling over others, but in bringing everyone together, in building a universe where all could participate in the process of becoming. The rest of the meeting was filled with discussions of how to integrate human innovations into the daily lives of other civilizations. For centuries, the Zelians and their allies had built their societies around strict rules and systems. But the humans, these cosmic creators, had shown that there was another way, one that was about imagination and collective creation. The humans weren't just presenting solutions to old problems, they were offering a new vision of existence itself. Later, as Xenon walked through the corridors of his ship, he was met by Ephraim, who had been deep in thought. It's hard to imagine, she said quietly, a future where we aren't just adapting to the universe. Where we're not just surviving it. Xenon turned to face her, his face a mixture of exhaustion and quiet realization. It's hard to imagine because we've never seen it before. For millennia, we've seen the universe as something to be understood and mastered. But the humans, he paused, searching for the right words. They've shown us that the universe is not something to be understood. It's something to be created. Ephraim's eyes softened as she nodded slowly. And in that creation, they've given us something we never thought we needed: hope. Hope for what we could build together, rather than what we could simply control. Zenon stood still for a moment, the weight of his thoughts heavy on him. He had spent so many years focused on knowledge, on mastery, on creating a society built on the principles of order. But now, as he watched the humans continue their work, he understood. The true legacy of humanity wasn't in their technology, or their immense power to change worlds. It was in their ability to imagine a future that was not confined to the limits of the present. They had redefined what progress meant, not by building bigger machines or conquering greater forces, but by creating a new world for everyone to share. Their legacy, Zenon whispered, his voice filled with a reverence he had never known before, will not be measured by the empires they've built, but by the worlds they've created. As the humans continued their work, reshaping the universe with their unprecedented power to innovate, it became clear that they were not only rethinking the galaxy's future, they were also teaching an important lesson that even the most advanced civilizations had overlooked: the vital importance of rest and reset. The galaxies they had transformed, the projects they had birthed, the energy they had harnessed, all led to one fundamental truth: no matter how powerful or enlightened a species might become, progress could never be sustained without time for reflection, renewal, and even pause. Zenon, who had watched the humans reshape entire worlds and reimagine systems that had once seemed unchangeable, now saw them taking a step back, quietly, almost unnoticed. They didn't rush forward with constant, unrelenting innovation. In fact, they had shown the galaxy something surprisingly simple: sometimes, the greatest act of progress is knowing when to stop and recharge. It was during one of the many gatherings in the Universal Chill Zone, the human, constructed haven where beings of all species came to bond and share moments of peace, that Zenon first realized this. The zone was a place of joy, certainly, a place where discussions about complex galactic issues could happen over games, over laughter, or over shared meals. But more than that, it was a place where the constant motion of progress, the infinite push toward greater and greater feats of engineering and creation, slowed to a manageable, human pace. I never thought I'd see the day when a council of leaders would settle a debate over a game of cards, Ephraim said, her voice filled with incredulity as she watched a group of humans sitting around a table with representatives from other civilizations, playing what appeared to be a simple, albeit very competitive, card game. Zenon couldn't help but smile, though there was a lingering sense of confusion in his thoughts. It's strange, isn't it? To think of something as trivial as a game being central to solving major galactic issues. He paused, his eyes following the laughter-filled game. But, that's exactly what they're doing. They're building connections, fostering understanding, and giving everyone a chance to breathe. Ephraim turned to him, her expression one of quiet realization. It's almost as if they're teaching us that without rest, we'll never have the clarity to move forward. That even the most brilliant minds need time to reset. Zenon's eyes gleamed, and he nodded slowly. Yes. Perhaps it's not just about creating new things or breaking old barriers. The humans understand that to innovate, to lead, to change the universe, you must also pause, reflect, and renew. Zenon had spent so many years focused on the relentless pursuit of knowledge. He had built a civilization that prided itself on precision, efficiency, and unceasing progress. The Zelians had believed that to grow was to always move forward, always break new ground, and never rest on one's laurels. But in the face of the humans, who did not merely advance but stopped, paused, and celebrated the act of rest as much as they did their creations, he felt the deep, undeniable truth of what they were teaching. It was during a particularly quiet moment, when the humans had come together to share stories of their long history, that Zelian first truly grasped the depth of their philosophy. The humans spoke not only of their triumphs but of their struggles, their mistakes, their wars, and their fallibility. And yet, even in their darkest hours, they had always come back. They had always found a way to rest, to reset, to rebuild. They had not only understood the importance of innovation but of balance. "We were always told we had to fight for progress," said one of the human elders, her voice warm yet filled with a quiet wisdom. "But what we learned, over time, is that the biggest battles aren't against enemies or obstacles. They're against ourselves. Against the temptation to keep pushing, to keep going when what we really need is to stop and reset. That's when the real change happens." Zelian, standing in the background, felt a stirring within him. It was a sentiment so simple, yet so powerful that it almost brought him to his knees. The idea that progress was not linear, that it didn't need to be a constant forward momentum, this idea was something he had never truly understood until now. Ephraim, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "They make it sound so simple." Zelian chuckled softly. "It's often the simplest ideas that are the hardest to grasp." He turned to her, his gaze thoughtful. "For centuries, we've believed that the greatest way forward is through relentless motion. But the humans, they've shown us a new way. A way that recognizes the importance of rest, of pausing the relentless pursuit and letting the universe itself breathe." It was clear now. The humans, with all their cosmic power, had mastered something that even the most advanced civilizations had neglected, the art of letting go. They knew that innovation was not about exhausting oneself, about endless work. It was about knowing when to step back, when to find peace, and when to allow new ideas to naturally take root. Zelian stood quietly, reflecting on his own actions, on his own civilization's relentless drive for progress. How many times had the Zelians pushed forward, never allowing themselves a moment of pause? How many times had they burned out their creativity, only to be left searching for new ideas in the dark? The answer was too many times. As he looked around at the humans and the other beings who had gathered in this space, laughing, resting, and sharing, they all seemed to understand a universal truth: progress wasn't a never-ending cycle of hard work. It was a balance. A dance between creation and rest, between pushing forward and pulling back. One of the humans caught Zelian's eye, a knowing smile on his face. "You see it now, don't you?" the human asked, as if reading Zelian's mind. "The key to everything, the real key, is balance. Without rest, there is no progress. Without reset, there is no innovation." Zelian didn't answer right away. His crystalline form shimmered in the dim light of the chill zone. There was so much more to this than he had ever realized. Perhaps, just perhaps, the greatest change in the galaxy wouldn't come from inventing new technologies or mastering new forces. It would come from learning to stop, to breathe, and to allow progress to unfold naturally, without force. As the humans began to prepare for another round of games, another night of sharing stories and laughter, Zelian felt a quiet peace settle over him. This was how the universe would grow. Not in fits of frenzy and continuous striving, but in moments of pause, of connection, and of rest. For the first time in his life, Zenon understood. True progress didn't come from endless motion, it came from balance. And that balance, he realized, was what humanity had given the galaxy.